Across all galaxies, over the history of recorded space and time, only Earth is known to be immersed by ocean. How rare, not only for a blue planet to exist, but for the waters that paint its extraordinary surface to also sustain such a diversity of life. As humans, those same ocean waters are carried in both our breath across all galaxies, over the history of recorded space and time, only Earth is known to be immersed by ocean. How rare, not only for a blue planet to exist, but for the waters that paint its extraordinary surface to also sustain such a diversity of life. As humans, those same ocean waters are carried in both our breath and blood. Our bodies are made of the very essence that sets the Earth apart. How then do we know more about the vastness of the universe than we do the depth of our own planet's beating heart? What worlds could exist across all galaxies? What damage over the history of recorded space and time? Only Earth is known to be immersed by ocean or yet to discover. How rare, not only for a blue planet to exist, World Oceans Day, but its extraordinary surface join the United Nations to also sustain such a diversity of life as we explore how Earth is more than it may seem, and bring together decision makers, those same ocean waters are carried in both our breath, indigenous communities, youth activists, and more, to finally put the ocean first. Because we live on a blue planet, it is time we act like it. Across all galaxies, over the history of recorded space and time, only Earth is known to be immersed by ocean. How rare,
So, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the official UN World Oceans Day, today, Thursday, June 8th. We're so happy that you're chiming in from all over the world and that we are able to showcase different aspects of what is going on in Kenya in regards to ocean research and community participation and everything else. We have today uh, intended to be able to broadcast from Mombasa. It might not be possible in terms of the broadcast and the ministry broadcasting live from Mombasa, but what we will be able to do is have a Q&A discussion and some showcasing of videos. And we thank you for joining us. We hope you find it exciting. What we'll try and do is do the parallel events. So starting at 9, I will play the national anthems as if this was an official national government event. And from after the national anthems are played, then we can start sort of have a watch and talk session together. Welcome. Thank you so much. And welcome to the official UN World Oceans Day, today, Thursday, June 8th. We're so happy that you're chiming in from all over the world and that we are able to showcase different aspects of what is to broadcast from Mombasa. It might not be possible in terms of the broadcast and the ministry broadcasting live from Mombasa, but what we will be able to do is have a Q&A discussion and some showcasing of videos. And we thank you for joining us. We hope you find it exciting. What we'll try and do is do the parallel events. So starting at 9, I will play the national anthems as if this was an official national government event. And from after the national anthems are played, then we can start sort of have a watch and talk session together. Welcome. Thank you so much.
Slowly you find there's nothing in that sand, which means there's no food for any organism. You'd lose the fertilizing component of the ocean. You'd also lose the anchoring of sediment. Seagrasses are just like the grass
And welcome
on
to
land.
the official UN World Oceans Day, today, Thursday, June 8th. We're so happy that you're chiming in from all over the world and that we are able to showcase different aspects of what is.
The adaptive potential of local seagrasses. This is something that is still open for research. We don't have all the answers. We've seen adaptive potential. Remember when I showed you
to broadcast from Mombasa, it might not be possible in terms of the broadcast and the ministry broadcasting live from Mombasa. But what we will be able to do is have a Q&A discussion and some showcasing of videos. And we thank you for joining us. We hope you find it exciting. What we'll try and do is do the parallel events. So starting at 9, I will play the national anthems as if this was an official national government event. And from after the national anthems are played, then we can start sort of have a watch and talk session together. Welcome. Thank you so much.
Slowly you find there's nothing in that sand, which means there's no food for any organism. You'd lose the fertilizer component of the ocean. You'd also lose the anchoring of sediment. Seagrasses are
I have a quick question for everybody. When it is live streaming and rebroadcasting, are you hearing one sound or are you hearing dual sounds? If you could type in the chat.
tuilinde Jumuiya Afrika Mashariki, tuwezeshe kuishi kwa amani, tutimize na malengo yetu. Jumuiya yetu sote tuilinde, tuajibike, tuimarike. Umoja wetu ni nguzo yetu, idumu jumuiya yetu. Uzalendo pia mshikamano viwe msingi wa umoja wetu, na tulinde uhuru na amani, mila zetu na desturi zetu. Jumuiya yetu sote tuilinde, tuajibike, tuimarike. Umoja wetu ni nguzo yetu, idumu jumuiya yetu. Viwandani na hata mashambani, tufanye kazi sote kwa makini, tujitoe kwa hali na mali, tuijenge jumuiya bora. Jumuiya yetu sote tuilinde, tuajibike, tuimarike. Umoja wetu ni nguzo yetu, idumu jumuiya yetu.
So good morning again and welcome. The purpose of World Oceans Day is to make you aware of the different types of activities. On Tuesday, you had an exposure to the different types of research. And you heard live from the speakers who are conducting the research so that you know they're real people. One of the issues or feedback that we got is to be able to see the context of what the speakers were talking about. So as a side event today, we will showcase videos, and please feel free to chat either in the Q&A or the webinar chat. It will be showcasing videos that give you an example of what the speakers talked about on Tuesday. And then for those of you who have the registration, we will compile highlights from the Mombasa event. You'll be able to receive that via email. We apologize for inability to do the live broadcast rescreen here as we were originally anticipating. Technical difficulties, we promise we'll get better for next year. And with that, if there are any questions, kindly raise your hand. I will start with some of the briefing videos and an historic treaty that has just been signed so that you get an awareness of what's going on internationally as well.
An historic agreement to protect the world's oceans has been approved after 10 years of talks. The High Seas Treaty aims to safeguard marine life in 30% of areas that don't belong to any single country. Only about 1% of these areas are currently protected. The deal is being hailed as a massive step by climate activists, as our climate reporter Esme Stallard reports.
The ship has reached the shore.
It took all night, but countries from around the world finally agreed on how to protect the high seas.
We will formally adopt the text in all 6 official languages of the United Nations.
High seas are international waters that aren't controlled by any nation. They make up 2/3 of the world's oceans and play host to most of our planet's marine life, some 2 million species. Until now, all countries had a right to fish, ship and research in these areas, but it's left the animals and plants living there vulnerable. Around 10% of monitored species are at risk of extinction.
I think that this treaty that will lay the groundwork for creating 30% of the ocean into marine sanctuaries that cannot be fished in is so important. We have to save these creatures.
Talks were deadlocked for years, mostly over how genetic material from plants and animals found in the high seas should be shared between nations. Several important drugs, including treatments for COVID, HIV and cancer, were developed from marine life. The potential for profit is huge. But no one knows how much ocean resources are truly worth, nor how they could be split.
It's a little bit hard to even wrap our heads around how big and how distant these areas are. So if you imagine like a big high definition widescreen TV, and if only like 3 or 4 of the pixels on that giant screen are working, that's kind of our knowledge of the deep ocean. Like we don't know so much of what's going on.
Countries will need to meet again to formally adopt the treaty. But for many, now there will be much relief. Esme Stallard, BBC News.
Well, let's get some more analysis on this. We're joined now by the head of Clean Transitions at Greenpeace Australia Pacific, that's Jess Panagiris. Thank you very much for talking to us. Some really good news. This is actually being called a historic win. Tell us why.
This is a major victory today, and we're all celebrating. This now gives the world the pathway towards protecting 30% of the high seas, which is critically important for protecting the incredible biodiversity that resides in the world's oceans. And this has been at least 15 years in the making. There's been many false starts. There's been so much effort put in from around the world. So we're not 100% there yet. There's still more work to be done, but this is a historic day.
And one of the things that this treaty is looking to do is put some law in the lawless areas of the high seas, the bits that nobody owns. But the critical question then is about implementation. What are the plans for how these laws will be enforced?
So now we need every country to ratify the treaty and agree to implement. And that work needs to happen as quickly as possible because we don't have time to wait. And so we are really calling on countries around the world that have agreed on this text to now get on with the job of protecting our oceans as quickly as possible.
You just said there, we don't have time to wait, suggesting that protecting these seas is critically important. Just explain a little bit why that is. What's at risk if this treaty doesn't go as planned?
Well, we are already seeing huge threats to our marine biodiversity, skyrocketing rates of animals being on the critically endangered list. That has flow-on effects right up and down the food chain. Our oceans are also critical for our resilience with a warming climate. And one of the things that these sanctuaries will do is provide some resilience, if you like, as the oceans warm. And the work here is not done. If we have 30% of the high seas in marine sanctuaries, that's a wonderful start. It protects those threatened species from overfishing, from ship strikes. There is more work to be done. We also need to protect them from climate change. We need to protect them from offshore oil and gas drilling, but we now have a pathway towards those marine sanctuaries, and that's just wonderful news.
It certainly is to have that pathway. As you say, a healthy ocean is critical for just our lives on this planet. But with time being so critical, how long is this process expected to take?
Well, processes of negotiating and implementing and ratifying agreements like this can spin out for a long time. This has been 15 years at least in the making. So we are asking for everyone to act as quickly as they can, ratify this domestically, move on with the implementation, because that's now the critical work. We need to take the steps that are essential to actually implementing those marine sanctuaries as soon as possible.
And certainly the hope is that it won't take another 15 years, but still a fantastic and monumental win today. Thank you very much for joining us, and good to get your thoughts. Jess Panagir is Head of Clean Transitions at Greenpeace Australia Pacific.
Sorry. I realized I've been speaking on mute myself. Sorry. I was just saying that this historic treaty is really important. All the what's called the open oceans. Go ahead. Go ahead, Dada. Yes, so what was going on up until this treaty was signed was that fishing in the open ocean, there was no way to protect that as if we were protecting in the same manner that we have marine spatial planning and protection of coastal areas. So what the video was highlighting is now 100 countries. This treaty, High Seas Treaty, was signed 3 months ago, and 100 countries have signed on. And what this now is the opening to be able to make sure that we're not, especially in terms of overfishing, that is not taking place in the high seas, because there's obviously more marine life in the high seas than in the coastal areas. And we want to make sure that we have the ability for that marine life to just regenerate and regrow and without exploitation. There were also some unfortunate use of glass mining activities in the high seas. Go ahead, Dandapani. Anybody else who wants to speak? Kindly raise your hand. I think let me see if Oliver, are you able to talk? I'll just go around participants, ask you to introduce yourselves. Okay, Dr. Pani said yeah, he has no question. Thank you. Ask you to give you a chance to introduce yourself or say what's on your mind. Ahmed, switching the mic over to you. You should be able to unmute yourself and make a few comments if you're able. Switching to David. David, are you able to talk? I know it's early in the morning. Oliver, are you able to talk? If so, you can unmute yourself and make any comments you want. Peter, I'm trying to activate you, but it seems like the connection is unstable. So I will kindly put anything in the chat because it seems like when I activate permission to talk on yours, there's nothing coming up. So with this, we will continue. And a reminder to feel free to put anything you want in the chat.
Did you download Grammarly? If you had
Sorry about that. So one of the questions that we received is what goes on at a KMFRI Training Center. There were some graduates, some those who have studied ocean sciences or marine sciences and have been looking for ways to even volunteer and how to engage. So this video will give you a little bit of an overview of what goes on at the KMFRI Regional Training Center.
Okay, I think I'd like to start by introducing myself. My name is Johnson Kazungu. I'm Director of Kenya Marine and Fisheries Research Institute. Kenya Marine and Fisheries Research Institute is one of the 6 national research institutions in Kenya. Kenya Marine, which is in short called KMFRI, has the mandate to conduct research on marine and fisheries in the country. We have a staff strength of about 100 scientists, but some of the scientists are conducting freshwater research. I think at the coast here we are about 40 scientists. About half of these 40 scientists have PhDs, the rest have masters and the first degree. We have a number of collaborative programs, both nationally and internationally. For instance, we have a collaborative program with Belgium, Flanders Marine Institute in Belgium. We recently received a research vessel, oceanographic research vessel, which we intend to use. We have already developed MOUs with a number of institutions on how to use this research vessel. So we have a number of programs that are going on, and I think this idea of having the ocean teacher is a very, very welcome idea because we believe very many people are going to benefit, and the uptake of this particular program is going to be very, very good for the country.
Open the door. Good.
Oh, a good exposure there.
Hello. My name is Richard Mokai, the referent in charge of Kenya Marine and Fisheries Research Institute. This is the Kenya Marine referent, which serves marine and freshwater staff for KMFRI, which is doing the stations are suited the role of Kenya, one in Kisumu, Kigati, Sangoro, Turkana, Baringo, Naivasha, and Sagana. Mombasa is the headquarters for Kenya Marine and Fisheries Research Institute. We have online journal articles or journal titles from Agora and Wadi. We also have KMFRI repository, which we are using against this space. We have around 5,900 records. We also tackle sources or requests from other libraries outside and within Kenya. We are also asked for input center for quite a long time, since 1994. And we have also various projects which are running, like with Africa. There's Kenya Coastal Development Project, which is being hosted by KMFRI, and many more. We also have students who are in attachment. You can see quite a number here, who usually come to the library to refer and to be assisted on the research they are doing, and even members of staff.
Okay, my name is Melchizedek Osore. I work for the Kenya Marine Research Institute. The project I'm running here is called the Kenya Coastal Development Project. This is a World Bank funded project that began on the 11th of November 2011. The program basically intends to assist the coastal communities of Kenya to have to make maximum use of their resources by conducting small community projects, and also the projects provide funding for university students at master's level and at BSc, so they can study courses that are relevant to the natural resource management and community service. This project is run under KMFRI, but in collaboration with 7 other institutions of the Kenya government. And so far, since we began, we have funded up to 50 community projects to the tune of 60 million, and we have supported around 54 masters and BSc students to complete their degree. And some of these students that have finished the degree, we are actually attaching them to the project here in Mombasa, and also to the other project offices in the partner agencies, Kenya Wildlife Services, Kenya Forestry, and the Fisheries Department, so that they actually use their training that they had and their academic knowledge to entrain the Kenya Coastal Development projects into their own institutions. It's a very popular project now, and we have brought in the county governments and the governors who are actually assisting in making sure that the coastal community has a big contribution in the Kenyan coasts. Thank you very much.
Hi, this is the wet lab section. And the entire area we are carrying out what we call issues to do with fish farming. And generally, we have 3 types of fish species within our culture facilities. And then what we generally do is that we want to make available these fish to the farmers. So generally there is an issue which has come in terms of innovation, that is on the fast growth of the fish. And we are advocating for what we call the culture of male fish. And the male fish, in this case, are the Nile tilapia male fish. We call them the monosex seed production, which essentially has been found to be doing very well within minimal time, so that at the end of the day, the farmers can have, desirable results within a short time. So we are carrying out what we call seed production in terms of, reproducing only males within these enclosures.
Here we basically carry research within the water columns. We take the samples, that's the planktons. Once we take the planktons, we do classify them into two. We have the zooplanktons and we have the phytoplanktons. Oceanography laboratory, where most of the work that we carry around here deals with the analysis of how we identify organisms and we classify them into different species. The machines that help us in doing some of this work, we have the microscopes. This is the dissecting microscope, which we use in basic identification of organisms. Then, like now you can see they are doing some work on benthic. They are trying to sort them out, so that after sorting them out, we can easily identify them into different species. Then on this side here, this is a compound microscope, which assists us in when you want to sketch an organism, you can easily sketch that organism by the use of this microscope.
Welcome you to the Natural Product and Post-Harvest Technology Lab. Here basically what we deal with is we deal with food. We deal with fish in 2 ways. That is to say, smoking as a process and solar drying as a process. This kind of technology used to be there even before, but what we are trying to do is to improve the technology so that it is done in a more scientific way and with the highest hygienic standard. So, if you look at the diagrams, what is up is the traditional way the forefathers used to do it, which was not environmental friendly. They used to cut a lot of trees in order to process their products. But if you look at it keenly, it was not really the actual smoking. What they were doing was more of roasting than smoking. The difference between roasted product and smoked product, the roasted product shelf life is not guaranteed, it has got short shelf life, but smoked product has got extended shelf life. So we came up with improved technology, that is to say the smoking cane, which is environmental friendly, consumes a lot, very few wood fuel.
Yeah, I'm Petronila Mombasa, and this is Fisheries Lab. Okay, we deal with stock assessment, fish, and under stock assessment, we look at the biological aspect of the fish and the population dynamics. So under the biological aspect of the fish, we take the gonads, we look at the maturity stages, and the sex. We also look at the sex of the fish. From that we can get the fecundity information about the fish. And then we also do a fish identification, whereby we use various manuals and identification keys to identify the various species that are brought here from the fieldwork. Yeah, that's majorly what we do in this laboratory.
Yes, my name is Gilbert Anisi. I'm a lab technician attached in the Newton's laboratory. And the Newton's laboratory, it is one of the laboratories which supports the aquatic life, maybe by doing the analysis, knowing to try to know the population or the volatility indicator in the aquatic life. And usually what we do, the parameters which we do analyze, it's nitrogen in terms of ammonia and nitrates using reduction column, and phosphorus, that is phosphates.
Yeah, my name is Dismas Kosien. I'm a technologist in the instrumentation laboratory. So at the instrumentation laboratory, we do two things. We take care of the physical oceanography and the equipment related to it. We also receive, install, and maintain equipment in all the other laboratories you have gone through. It's like a maintenance laboratory.
I'm an intern in KMFRI. We usually work here in the microbiological lab.
So as you have seen, there's a lot of hands-on activities that go on at Kenya Marine and Research Fisheries Research, Kenya Marine and Fisheries Research Institute, sorry. And the question we get a lot from those who have graduated is how to get an internship or an attachment. Know that the easiest way to do this is to volunteer, which means you have to be able to cover your own cost financially. There would not be a stipend, but you would be able to work and get exposure to the activities. Of course, this is not something that can be done remotely or long distance, so it would be good for you to be living or staying close to the KMFRI facility or regional center that you would like to collaborate with or get an internship, volunteer assignment for. If you're able to do that, and again, I stress volunteer would mean that you are not getting paid, but are still able to interact and get assigned and exposed to things that would give you experience and exposure to what goes on a daily basis. I will give us a short pause in case there are any questions. And just checking here in terms of the update of what is going on. We apologize again that this was supposed to be a live stream from what was going on at Jomo Kenyatta Beach in Mombasa. The first event of the day is for guests to arrive and assist with the beach cleanup. So that has been taking place while giving an opportunity for chief guests to arrive. So if you have been to Jomo Kenyatta Beach lately, you'll see a marked difference in terms of after the beach cleanup is completed. And once the chief guests arrive, they will be given a guided tour of the exhibition stands. There'll be opening prayer and some live entertainment in terms of dancing and music in commemoration of today, World Oceans Day. Again, the theme is Planet Ocean, Tides Are Changing. And after the entertainment, there will be some speeches. So I will now activate another learning. What we're trying to do here in this side event is just share information and videos that help you get a better idea and see what was going on. One of the videos, so think of this as your online tour of booths and stands. One of the speakers on Tuesday was shared about women in ocean and the gender dimensions. So we thought it would be good for you to be able to see a video on what women in ocean science do. Give me just a second to switch over.
There is a certain amount of assumption that people make when they see a woman, and then they get surprised that, oh, you know, this is not what I was expecting.
There are several women working within the region in marine sciences, and I'm one of them.
What I like best in my job, wow, it's to meet people and to meet also coral reef fishes.
It's a unique field. It's not crowded like, let's see, being an accountant.
Every day I'm doing something new. The traveling, the connection with the other people, it's really good. And the teaching as well. I like the feeling of helping students to broaden their vision.
Marine science does not pay like a business job would do. And so the women that do choose to stay in marine science are women that are passionate.
I have supervised a lot of students from locally and also from abroad. And they've been doing a lot of work which has benefited not only Uyomsa, but the country in general.
Well, I work for Kenya Wildlife Service. The rangers would salute you, whatever, and especially once I got to a very senior level, they're used to saying sir, so they'd confuse, they'd say sir and then say madam. But it didn't upset me. I didn't feel like they were doing because they were trying to be discriminated. It's just that that's what they're used to, and then they got used to the other way. But I do remember one time we were going scuba diving, and the rangers were all like carrying my tank, and like see if I needed to be protected or something like that. And when we got on board and I was diving, when we came back, they were like, okay.
From the beginning, I knew I wanted to do something in the sea because I feel that very big connection with the sea.
I've always been, one, a tomboy, two, loved to be outdoors. And my mother was a dean at the University of Dar es Salaam, and she used to take us a lot to the beach.
I get into marine science as I was a child. I grew up near Coral Reef at Réunion Island, where I was born.
And at that time, they also had these Jacques Cousteau documentaries. There was much to watch on TV, but the documentaries were really good. And I didn't know that I wanted to have a career in marine sciences. I didn't even know there was such a thing as marine sciences, but I was very attracted by the ocean.
I was inspired by Commandant Cousteau. It was for me magical and a mysterious underwater world.
I went to marine sciences by chance because that was my second option when I applied for high school. And then I fell in love with it. That's how I became a scientist.
The lack of having the skills that I needed and also not having the particular knowledge that I needed. And it wasn't challenges in my high school.
It was not easy for me to learn how to swim. I had to go to swim at special times when there were no men around. Of course, now things are changing.
Of course, being in a developing country, there are always those issues of trying to find a scholarship. It's not so easy. But overall, I think I had a very good supporting system at home and within the university as well.
We have projects with women community members who are doing seaweed farming, but they don't know how to swim. So we are trying also to teach them how to swim so that they can do their work without depending on the men. So it was a kind of a challenge, but I went through it.
Before I went to do my master's, I was working with the Kenya Marine Fisheries Research Institute as a marine scientist. And there we had technicians. And so if you collected a sample of water, the technician would analyze it for you. If you needed to go out in the field, there was a car and a driver. When I went to Florida, all that you have to do yourself. But I think it was very good because it taught me to think creatively, to learn the things that I needed to do to get by.
I don't think it's a challenge to be a woman in marine science. It's just a challenge to be a woman in science. The society not tell, but nearly tell that science it's reserved to men.
Very few women are willing to step up into the leadership roles. And that begins to present a problem because if I'm not growing leaders behind me, then I have no one to step into the shoes in the future.
In my career, I have not felt that because of being a woman, I have been marginalized or discriminated against in any way.
Another challenge that comes up is motherhood. When I became a mother, I felt I had lost 2 years of work time.
I had a very strong mother, and we grew up with a sense that, well, she has achieved, so we couldn't see a limit to our achievement. And so I've always felt that the limitation for me is me, not so much the system.
The challenge is to keep their passion intact. The challenge is to keep them motivated.
I think it's important to encourage women to trust them and to give them this power to believe on themselves. Often the limit is mainly in your mind.
There's a lot of skills that we learn that are not necessarily taught in school. So figure out the skills that you need, and even as you're in school, start working on those skills.
You need to build your confidence, go to trainings, try to go beyond what you think you can do, and things will come.
They have to be faithful, they have to be available, and they have to be teachable. If they are teachable and they listen to advice, they will go far.
When they are doing something or research, they have to do it with a strong will. to be dedicated to do it well, because things that are done well are producing good results.
Work hard and believe in your star, and it's the best way to get close to it.
I think that you get a better perspective of the environment you're studying when you can interact physically with it. Be there, be in the water, see what's happening.
I would tell any woman who wants to be a marine scientist to take it on, because it's possible. They should put their best foot forward, participate. Once you show some element of participation, then everything will fall into place.
I enjoy mentoring young scientists. We, as elders, we feel we know a lot, but when you give the work to the young ones, they come out with ideas and things which I didn't think about. So it helped me a lot, and I've written a lot of papers by linking with these young scientists.
I was involved, and I'm still involved in mentoring young women scientists. And I think it's important to be close to young women, to make them trust to them, and just help them when there's a problem.
I've been fortunate enough to be part of the African Women in Research and Development in Agriculture, and that is funded by Bill Gates Foundation. They pick ladies from 11 African countries, and I was fortunate enough to be a fellow in the 2013 cohort.
And I think it's important that women mentor girls and boys, because I think that we can't solve the gender problem through empowering only one gender. We need to empower both. I feel that somebody who grows up seeing a woman of a certain status, whether they are a boy or a girl and they are being mentored by them, when they grow up, they will sort of take on that sort of very open perspective which I have, and which I think is one of the biggest ways that we can deal with the gender issues, to bring up generation of people who have a very open perspective.
So from my mentorship, I also learned how to help someone else to have a ripple down effect. It's good to be a marine scientist.
So there you have it. You have just seen what women in ocean science do. And the reason for showing that video is a lot of times when people hear gender equity in ocean science or any other activity, the assumption is that there's a desire to replace one gender with another. In other words, increase the number of women and reduce the number of men. And that is absolutely not the objective. It's just that historically, especially in African countries, women have not been given an opportunity to practice science in especially what are considered, as you heard in the beginning, there's a stereotype that these are very difficult, physically challenging activities and that women cannot perform. They've shown that they can deep sea dive, they can go out in mangroves, they can do anything that is required for the job. And at the end of the day, science is science. The objective is to be able to get everybody used to working with each other. If you've never had a woman on your team, you might be wondering in terms of, are they special accommodations, or what do you have to do? In terms of science, you can see that there's nothing different that needs to be had. In terms of the conversation, of course, avoid any stereotypical jokes about women or about any other particular group. I would say in terms of leadership style, having been on all male teams, men tend to want to aggressively drive a point forward. Women tend to listen to a conversation, and then when there's a lull in a conversation, try to speak up. So allow for more pauses and silence. so that women get a chance to raise their voice, sort of jumping in while everybody's speaking tends to be a difference in gender communication. Also directly ask for of the opinions or perspectives of the women in your team, and ask them from your perspective, not to pick on you because you're a woman, but just to understand as an important member of this team, what do you see that we're missing? What should we be doing differently? Because as we say at CSDI, women are the other 50% of innovation. So you'll get ideas that you've probably never thought of before, and you'll have a much stronger team. Know that globally in the planet and national levels, when you have large data sets, the population distribution is almost 50-50. So think about that when you're assembling a team. If 50% of the population that exists is not represented on your team, then it would be very hard to develop any type of projects that really speak to everybody's needs, interests, and priorities. And I'll allow opportunities for questions. Again, you can type in the chat, in the Q&A, you can raise a hand. I can give you permission to speak in terms of if you have any reflections on gender dimensions in marine ocean science. While you're thinking, I'll cue the next video. So in terms of the itinerary at Jomo Kenyatta Beach in Mombasa, once the entertainment concludes, which is scheduled to conclude at approximately 10 a.m., then there will be speeches by the County Commissioner of Mombasa, the regional coordinator as well for the coastal region, partners from the CSOs, NGOs, and private sector academia. There'll also be speeches from the county government of Mombasa, the government agencies, KFS, KWS, KMFRI, NEMA, KMA, KCGS. Alliance Française of Mombasa will also be in a speech with the Nature Conservancy, Wildlife Conservation Society, Go Blue Project, IOC UNESCO, KNATCOM, the DG for Kenya Fisheries Service, KMFRI, and the DG for KMFRI. And that was scheduled to end at approximately 11:30 a.m. So we will coincide with that schedule on our end. And we'll do now, again, the purpose of having you here joining us is to give you visuals and allow you to see a lot of what we were talking about on Tuesday. One of the issues that's coming up is how does climate change in particular affect the oceans? We know how it affects us on land. We have more flooding and different elements of that, or we have drought, but what does it do? What does the rising temperature do to life under the sea? So the next video will be a little longer. I think it's about 25 minutes, and it's from FAO. And although it's 8 years old, it's still relevant. It is going to show you what scientists are concerned about and what they have measured in terms of what happens to life under the sea as temperatures are rising.
Mr. Chair, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very sorry not to be in person in Boracay Island, but for reasons beyond my control, I couldn't travel to be with you today. In this presentation about fisheries and climate change, I will be talking about the impact of climate change, vulnerabilities, mitigation, and adaptation. But I think we need to be reminded that all our actions with regards to climate change have to be in the context of food security and economic development, as is stipulated in the objective paragraph of the UN Framework on Climate Change. And this is the reason. In spite of advances in recent years, hunger is still at the level of around 800 million people in the world. We have made good advances, both in absolute figures that have gone down and also in relative numbers, but we are still in a position which is unacceptable. And it's not only hunger which is a problem, it is also the number of people that are malnourished and also the growing number of people that are obese. But we see all of this in connection of poverty. The regions where we have abject poverty, we have abject hunger and abject malnutrition. Fisheries play a big role in food and nutrition security. The level of contribution of fish to animal protein consumption is much higher in the least developed countries, particularly the low-income, food deficit countries, than on the average. We can see on the graph that as the absolute intake of animal protein goes down, the proportion of fish of animal protein goes up, which means that these countries are extremely sensitive to changes in the supply of fish. Fish supplies us with a lot of important nutrient elements, not just protein, as is the most commonly named important nutritional element, but also omega-3s, various vitamins and minerals like vitamin A and zinc and vitamin D. And in this small fish on the left, we can see all these nutrients in one perfect package for the daily consumption of these elements. Fisheries also contribute very significantly to the socio-economic development, and the value chains through the production increases step by step. And the ultimate position is that about 12% of the world population is dependent on fisheries for their livelihoods. FAO has as its main overarching goals to eradicate hunger, to eradicate poverty, and to promote sustainable utilization of natural resources. In fisheries, our main initiative is now the Blue Growth Initiative, which has various components developed in various ways that you see on this slide. All the issues that I will be mentioning and discussing later on in this presentation are in one way or another incorporated into our activities based on the Blue Growth Initiative. And we hope that you will be working with us in the realm of the blue growth in the foreseeable future. The pathways of climate impacts in fisheries and aquaculture are quite complex. The biophysical changes from greenhouse gases are through the ocean currents, both sea level rises, rainfall is affected, river flows are affected, lake levels, thermal structures, storm severity, etc. And that affects the various production systems, ecology, fishing and aquaculture, also communities, and the wider society and the economy. The impacts can then be specified on various levels: it's biodiversity and production, distribution, as we'll see later, disease, coral bleaching and calcification, It affects the operations on safety and efficiency, various losses and damages to assets, risks to health and life, displacements, etc. This one shows the major effects, both the effects on the corals, the shellfish, biodiversity, and the distribution of the fish stocks around the oceans. We will see on the next slide. This slide shows how stocks are predicted to change the distribution in the future due to climate change. The major effects that stocks are going to be moving from equatorial locations to the poles, more to the north than to the south, and they're going to be moving from coastal areas out to the deeper oceans. This can have major effects, especially on coastal fisheries that are in the equatorial regions. Small-scale fishermen catching their fish from the beach with cast nets will maybe not in the future have the fish within reach of how far they can cast to make a living. So they need to adapt and to develop methods how they can follow the fish further out into the ocean. Opportunities, as I will mention later, will possibly arise at the higher latitudes, where the opening up of the Arctic Ocean will open up space for species that are following the temperature gradient up and down the globe. This slide shows us the impact or vulnerability pathways. The red part of it is developed by IPCC and shows the ecological connectivity of vulnerability, whereas the lower orange and blue part is developed by the sector to show specific impacts on the fisheries and aquaculture sector, on the socio-economic systems, which can be considerable, and if they are not managed properly, can then have a negative feedback on the ecological impacts. This slide shows us a map of the world where the various colors represent the vulnerability estimates for different countries. The dark red ones are the ones that are most vulnerable, and then the lighter colors are less vulnerable. This is a graph from 2009, which is basically based on temperature measurements. So it's not new, but it is, however, still the best one of the kind that we have. Unfortunately, it in many ways mirrors the picture we see when we look at the development status of nations, so that those that are least developed are also the most vulnerable, which makes our attempts to mitigate and adapt even more difficult, but also makes it more necessary. Now let's look at the impacts on various regions. These two pictures on this slide show the predicted effects, or rather the difference between the 2-degree scenario by 2050 and the difference between if the emissions had been at the same level as they were at the year 2000. The upper graph shows the effects of landings of fish in various countries in West Africa. When we look at the lighter bars, which represent the situation in 2000, we see that there are both ups and downs. But when we look at the darker bars for 2050 or the 2-degree scenario, they are all in one direction, to lower landings of fish. The lower graph shows basically the same effect for job opportunities or the loss of jobs because of effects of climate change expected on the fisheries by 2050. We see there that there are ups and downs in 2000, but in the 2-degree scenario, the dark bars are all in one direction. This is quite serious because traditionally fisheries has been a kind of an emergency occupation for many. They have worked on the land, but when disaster has struck, they had moved down to the coast and resorted to fisheries. So this opportunity will not be there in the future. This is a particularly interesting slide which shows change in distribution of tuna in the Pacific with various, with the stages that the tuna distribution will change by through the years, where due to temperature changes, the distribution of tuna is going to be displaced eastward into the Pacific. The interesting thing, however, is that the communities in the Pacific have reacted to this by setting up management systems which will facilitate the industry and the countries in question to adapt to this by transferring quotas from one company to another or a region to another. But these are the predicted changes, and with regards to the changes, there has to be a reaction. This is a complicated graph which shows both the effects, whether they are positive or negative in the various parts of the Pacific, and also whether the impact is going to be high or low. It varies, and therefore we need to have systems put in place which help us react and adapt to the changing situations. Now let's look at a couple of countries in more detail and how the supply and demand of fish is predicted to change in the face of climate change over the next decades. In China, the population is in fact predicted to fall to slightly below 1.3 billion by 2050. Climate change is expected to decrease marine capture in China by approximately 3%, but fish consumption is still expected to increase. So Chinese aquaculture has to make up the drop and the additional demand. And to do that, using the current available fish meal, the fish in, fish out ratio has to decrease to down to about 0.1.5. In the time span that we are talking about until 2050, I would predict that we would be able to respond in this way. Even though the situation with regards to fish meal resources is not a critical one at the moment, but by 2050, if aquaculture is going to grow as it is needed to grow to make up the shortfall in between supply and demand in fish, we will have to find solutions with regards to inclusion of fish meal in the diets. In Bangladesh, the situation is different. There, the population is expected to grow by 2050. However, the reduction in marine capture fisheries and aquaculture is not expected to drop, and therefore very little additional supply is needed to keep up the demand. And we would expect aquaculture in Bangladesh to be able to respond to this challenge relatively easily, but still it would mean that the fish in, fish out ratio has to drop. And now to a different part of the world. The potential impacts of climate change on fisheries in the Arctic are different to what we have been discussing earlier. Basically, the reduction in ice coverage will open up new areas for fishing, and it is likely, and we're already seeing this, the major species in the North Atlantic, for instance, are moving northwards in that direction. Various species, as listed in these slides, will show changes in distribution and possibly in abundance. And possibly some species that are not being utilized today in any major way might be creating opportunities in the future. This we need to see depending on the development and also probably depending on economic factors, market acceptability and prices. However, this calls for some reaction with regards to regional fisheries management. Globally, we have a system of RFMOs which are based on UNCLOS and UN fish stocks agreements and work according to the FAO Code of Conduct of Responsible Fisheries and related instruments. The RMFOs have the prime responsibility for management in the high seas beyond the sovereign EEZs. And the Arctic area is so far only partly covered by RFMOs that have been set up specifically to manage those ocean areas or species in these areas. In this area, we can see the RFMOs that are operational in the Arctic area. The blue area west of Greenland and east of the US is the NAFO area, the North Atlantic Fisheries Organization, which manages that area. And the pink area east of Greenland and west of Scandinavia is the NAFO area. It's the Northeast Atlantic Fisheries Commission area or NEAFC area. This area extends quite far into the Arctic and roughly covers with a smaller NAFO area 1/4 of the area. These two RFMOs, they have a general mandate in their respective areas for the fish stocks, with the exception of tuna, which normally is managed separately in 5 separate tuna RFMOs, one of them being ICAT, which operates in the Atlantic. And the ICAT area actually extends into the Arctic region, as we can see with the yellow overlay on the slide. So we could say that parts of the Arctic are covered by the present system, but still parts are not, and therefore the international community has to react and set up structures to cover the uncovered part of the Arctic. Now let's turn to mitigation of greenhouse gas emissions. The fishing operations emit considerable amounts of greenhouse gas, but there is quite a substantial possibility to reduce these emissions by both doing changes to the equipment and doing changes to our behavior and management and our maintenance of the equipment that we use. For instance, up to 60% fuel savings could be had by using diesel engines instead of petrol engines. Correct settings of nozzles and propellers could save up to 20% during fishing operations. And we have seen that boats with fouled hulls and propellers often use up to 44% more fuel over an extended period if not cleaned properly. So this is quite positive and shows that we can react and reduce emissions. In general, where and how we produce our food can also have a great impact on emissions. On this slide, you see a comparison between some aquaculture species and the major terrestrial protein-producing species. There, from various ecological perspectives, the aquaculture species are doing much better than the terrestrial animal production systems. I'm not saying that we should stop producing meat and only eat fish, but I'm saying that a shift in emphasis to getting a greater part of our protein from the oceans through aquaculture and possibly still fisheries makes sense from the point of view of mitigating greenhouse gas effects. In general, you can say that the run-of-the-mill aquaculture species does about as well as the best of the terrestrial species, but then the best of the aquaculture species do far better than the best of the terrestrial species. One of these species is salmon, which does particularly well from this point of view. However, we know that we will not feed the world with salmon, and there are limits to how a high-priced, high animal protein utilizing species can be used for that purpose. But however, the salmon industry is an industry which can afford to do research and delve into how to reduce their impact on the environment, and therefore their advances can be lessons learned for other aquatic animals that we could be growing in the future. And we see on this slide how feed conversion rates have improved in salmon production over time, and how greenhouse gas contribution or greenhouse gas release per edible protein unit of salmon, how that has gone down compared to other species, both aquatic species and terrestrial species. So what do we do and how do we do it? Better feeding technologies, better feeds, better management, better genetic improvements, better access to quality feeds, and better management of aquaculture management areas. And how do we do this? Those are the general capacity raising issues through training, both export trainings and bringing people to the areas where the best practices are being practiced, establishing cooperation programs, and sharing technological advances through public and private cooperation. In the field, we are now increasingly faced with adapting to climate change. And there are various projects that are ongoing and have been successful. In Palau, for instance, we are experimenting with new varieties of salt-tolerant taro, and traditional management techniques are being tested and monitoring programs are being introduced to improve both clam and crab farming. In Peru, there are innovative insurance schemes being introduced where index-based instruments are used to predict the occurrence of previously established climate change events using known parameters. In the Seychelles, we are doing ecosystem-based climate change adoption projects. This is done to address flooding from an ecosystem approach. Coastal erosion is being addressed via mangroves, and sand dunes are being rehabilitated. And in this, we are using native species and wetland restoration, and alien species are being removed and agricultural land reclaimed. In Lake Malawi, we're reducing post-harvest losses. Improved smoking kilns to dry fish have been introduced to address post-harvest losses. As climate change reduces the quantity and quality of fish harvested from the lake, reducing post-harvest loss increases in importance. In addition to reducing these losses, the smoking kilns also reduce deforestation and improve water quality, improving habitat quality for aquatic species and removing an additional stressor for fish. In Bangladesh, very interesting experiments have been done to help in keeping fish in homemade ponds during flooding period. This has both been done to keep fish in the ponds that have been placed there on purpose, but also to keep fish in the ponds that accidentally enter the ponds during flooding. So this is both through stocking and through migration of fish into the ponds by setting up gates, one-way gates, to keep the fish in the ponds, which then later can be harvested. And this has proved to be very effective. In the US Pacific, the acidification of the oceans has affected shellfish hatcheries. And to react to that, monitors have been set up so that in the advance of acidic cold water entering from the Pacific into the hatcheries, the hatchery runners can adjust the acidity and the chemistry of the water in the hatcheries to prevent negative effects from the acidic water on the baby clams. This has proved to be a very successful, even though a very specific attempt or a method to react to climate change in these hatcheries. Okay. In this presentation, I've gone through the various impacts of climate change on fisheries. I've gone through vulnerabilities, both the geographic vulnerabilities and the complex processes, as well as various mitigation possibilities and adoption possibilities. We know that climate change is upon us, and we have to react, we have to do something. We can only do that if we work together and if we show ingenuity in finding new methods. If we do that, then fisheries, and particularly aquaculture, will be able to help us ward off food and nutrition insecurity. And as I mentioned in the beginning, that is a principle or a prerequisite in the objective article of the UNFCCC, the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. Thank you very much.
So that, again, just to clarify for everybody, in terms of the speaker, it's an 8-year-old video, and it was from FAO, Food and Agriculture Organization. And the speaker was Arnie Matheson, who at the time was Assistant Director General. And again, this video is 8 years old. And the focus was to help you understand what scientists are looking for under the sea and how climate change affects. And we're now been joined, you all remember, or if you were in the Tuesday session, Ms. Eva Komba, and she was one of the speakers. And she's the gender specialist. And Eva, we had gone through earlier the video of the WIOMSA video of women in marine science. and looking at the fact that women can participate equally in some of these and bringing the other 50% of innovation onto the table. I didn't know if you wanted to have any comments or additional feedback or anything you wanted to mention to those present. You can go ahead. So then let me do this. Let me then switch to another preview. One of the things that we wanted to highlight is, and we'll also include videos that showcase how to make money in this. We know that's an important, but before getting into that, we wanted to showcase the importance, and this is an international IOC UNESCO, on looking at the issues of conservation from a cultural heritage perspective. And we know we have Fort Jesus, and we have a number of historical buildings along our coastline. And there's a sea level rise due to the melting of the ice glaciers, and understanding the risks that happen when that. And so how do we look at methods for protecting and conserving our cultural heritage? Because needless to say, these historical buildings cannot be rebuilt. So let me.
I'm Joanne Clark. I'm a professor of archaeology at the University of East Anglia and a specialist in heritage and climate change, particularly on the African continent. I'm going to talk briefly today about the impacts of extreme seas, that is sea level rise and coastal erosion, on heritage sites in Africa. So the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change is virtually certain that global mean sea level is not only rising, it is accelerating. The sum of glacier and ice sheet contributions is now the dominant source of global mean sea level rise. Observations from tide gauges show an increase from 1.4 millimeters per year between 1901 and 1990 to around 3.6 millimeters per year during the period of 2006 to 2015. The IPCC say that at the century scale and without adaptation, the vast majority of low-lying islands, coasts and communities face substantial risk, whether they are urban or rural, continental or island, at any latitude and irrespective of their level of development. Sea level rise is not globally uniform, however. Various ocean dynamics and terrestrial ice loss generate regional departures of around 30% around the global mean sea level rise. For example, subsidence caused by human activity is currently the most important cause of relative sea level rise change in many delta regions of the world. At the coast, local sea level change is additionally affected by wave run-up, tidal level, wind forcing, sea level pressure, dominant modes of climate variability, seasonal climate periodicities, ocean weather patterns known as mesoscale eddies, changes in river flow, and anthropogenic subsidence. These local contributions, combined with storm surges and tides, result in extreme sea levels, which last for a short time and contrast with the gradual increase in sea level rise over time. Future rise in global mean sea level caused by thermal expansion, melting of glaciers and ice sheets, and land water storage changes is strongly dependent on which degree of warming is calculated. Degrees of warming are based around greenhouse gas concentrations in the atmosphere. This is not emissions. In simple terms, the higher the concentration of greenhouse gases, the faster the planet reaches a 2-degree or 3-degree rise in average global temperature. The Paris Agreement pledged to limit global warming to below 2 degrees, but many climate scientists already believe that target has been breached, and so the next IPCC assessment report has introduced further degrees of warming, including 3 degrees as an example of a more likely scenario. Importantly, sea level rise at the end of the century is projected to be faster under all degrees of warming, including those compatible with achieving the long-term temperature goal as set out by the Paris Agreement. By 2100, global mean sea level will rise between half a metre under a low 1.5 degrees of warming and up to a metre under 3 degrees of warming. There are 2 forms of coastal damage attributed to climate change-induced seas, coastal flooding and coastal erosion. Coastal erosion in urban regions, at least, is most damaging, but hard to pin on climate change alone, as there are often numerous anthropogenic factors that can exacerbate climate-related extreme seas. So this slide shows you Fort Princeton, one of the 23 castles and forts that comprise the World Heritage Site number 34 along the Ghanaian coastline. In the last 50 years, since 1970, the fort has been badly damaged on its sea facade by coastal erosion from storm surges. Yet it is also in disrepair due to neglect. What is more, the coastal erosion that has led to the damage to its facade is almost entirely due to human intervention to do with damming of the Volta River. Engineers have identified a number of anthropogenic changes that they suggest have led to extreme erosion. These include reduced sediment discharge from the Volta River due to the damming at Okosombo, subsidence arising from the reduced sediment supply, beach sand mining, and ironically, the construction of sea defence structures to manage erosion in Quetta and Ada using groins. What this demonstrates is that the causes of coastal erosion are complex and context-specific. 3 points to bear in mind here are that some of the worst instances of loss and damage to heritage from sea level rise and coastal erosion may have very little to do with climate change. Instead, climate change is more likely to exacerbate loss and damage to already vulnerable heritage, and that mitigation strategies, often with the best intentions in mind, can lead to shoreline retreat, and something I want to return to. A recent study of 398 heritage sites in 37 countries across the African continent at risks of the impacts of extreme seas due to climate change showed that 69% of natural heritage sites and 50% of cultural heritage sites will be affected by rising seas by 2030 under a no-change scenario, i.e. under a warming scenario of 1.5 degrees. This research conducted by myself and colleagues show that the impacts of sea level rise and coastal erosion will happen across the entire African coastline, and that the threat is not 30 years away or 50 years away, but is happening this decade. Not only is it crucial that we identify and quantify threats, adaptation and mitigation plans need to be implemented before the damage is irreversible. A diversity of adaptation responses to coastal impacts and risks have already been implemented around the African continent, but mostly this has been a reaction to current coastal risk experienced as disasters such as the floods in Grand Bassam or the coastal erosion of the Ghanaian coast. Hard coastal protection measures such as groins, seawalls and surge barriers are widespread, but often they exacerbate a problem by simply pushing it down the coast and creating a threat somewhere else. One of the most effective adaptation measures is the ability of ecological systems to act as sea defences by stabilising shorelines, but the time it takes to establish natural barriers can be wiped out by the frequency of extreme events. Importantly, effective responses need to be context-specific and tailor-made using an appropriate mix of measures implemented over time as sea levels rise. As a recent report by the IPCC on coastal threats point out, designing and implementing an appropriate mix of responses is not only a technical task, but also a political and value-laden social choice that involves trade-offs between multiple values, goals, and interests. The IPCC lists 5 responses to sea level rise: protection, accommodation, advance, retreat, as the 5. But cultural heritage comes with its own set of limitations and vulnerabilities, which means that many of the responses that can be taken are simply not feasible for heritage. So the objective should be to take measures now while there is still time, and time is the principal disruptor to adaptation. So if we're talking about adaptation, what we need to think about is taking action now with the long term in mind, avoiding new development commitments in high-risk locations, social learning, experimentation and innovation to inform technical solutions, to build shared understanding and develop locally appropriate sea level rise responses, to recognize the political nature of adaptation and to explicitly address vulnerability and equity implications to achieve enduring enabling impact responses, to focus on enabling community capabilities for responding to sea level rise and, where necessary, complementing community knowledge, skills and resources, to involve stakeholders early and consistently throughout decision-making and implementation of SLR responses, and to draw upon multiple knowledge systems to co-design and co-produce sea level rise responses. I hope this has been helpful, and thank you very much for listening.
So with that, you had a different perspective, and we didn't delve into it as much on Tuesday in terms of protecting cultural heritage. And know that UNESCO has a definition term called intangible cultural heritage, which means there are things like, for example, community knowledge and that's handed down across generations, the practices that may not be documented. Of course, the physical formation, the geology and the shapes of regions and the types of species, whether they're cataloged and documented or not. The other parts are, of course, the things that you know in terms that are obvious, the buildings, the wildlife, including fisheries. So one of the risks that we have in all of this climate change, the same way we're worried about losing our personal property, is losing those elements of intangible cultural heritage. And if you're thinking about ways you can assist, if you have the ability to catalog or to create networks that can identify support systems for protecting cultural heritage elements, that is also an important way. And remember, there's a whole decade ahead of us. It's not just this day that we're honoring World Oceans Day. There's a whole decade of activities, so you don't have to feel pressured that, oh, I have to get things done in a week. You can give yourself a month, 2 months, 6 months, come back to the team and say, here's what I would like to do to help, or start just getting involved in discussions. And then as you get more familiar, figure out ways to assist. In terms of these speakers that I mentioned that who would be presenting, there's also the CECM for water from Mombasa County, acting presiding judge for Mombasa Environmental and Land Court, and the resident judge for Mombasa Environment and Land Court as well. So there's a reason that the judges and land courts are being referred to in this. I'll pause and see if anybody has any questions, wants to raise hand before I show you a video on the legal enforcement and multi-agency efforts to coordinate on legal protection issues. Any questions?
The main objective of this multi-agency dialogue is to look at areas of collaboration and cooperation with great emphasis on wildlife, forestry, fisheries, and marine crime along the coastal region, which is becoming an area of focus for us. And we thank the UNODC for bringing this workshop together, because we're now talking to each other and being able to address issues that affect a multi-agency as far as wildlife, forest, and fisheries crime is concerned. It's all about trying to work together to be able to achieve zero poaching, to be able to bring marine, fisheries, forest crime to a level that we would say that we've done our best.
Corruption is pervasive in all our spheres of work, I must say. And when talking about environmental crimes, it's also one of those high-risk areas.
UNODC has brought in a forum where we are working now with the other teams. Before, we never had a forum, we never had any engagement where we were working with the different agencies. Everyone was working in silo, everyone was working on their own, but UNODC has brought us together. Now we have understood who we work with from different counties. We have understood the immediate people who we can contact if we have issues from the different agencies.
This is why this forum is very important, because not only do you get to meet different players within this field, but you get to get different points of view. And from the different points of views, you're able to get solutions. And that is what we've been doing for the last.
So often repeated African phrase, proverb, it takes a village. And now you're getting to see different components of the village coming together. And that was the legal perspective and the enforcement officers that help create the systems. And also, so think about, yesterday we had some beach management units, and there were members of the fishing community, and they were complaining that they feel that there are injustices in terms of access to fishing rights or allocation of funds, and some of these, and also to be able to track the illegal activities, and that some of these issues create a problem that then when people are angry, they do strange things. So looking at it from that perspective, thinking about what solutions you think should be brought to the table. You now know through UNDC, there's an ability to, there's a team that these issues can be raised to for discussion, and they can be able to improve, because the easiest way the most cost-effective form of enforcement is to develop systems that people are happy with. When you're happy with something, there's less negative behavior or disruptive behavior to a system. And happy with includes equity. So think about those issues. Think about ways you can send an email, have ideas, alert. And there's now that's component of a team that we're able to know exists. And now I'll switch to showing you the blue carbon credits. Everybody has been saying some of these new finance things sound so esoteric and so strange, and how do we make money? They're happy to announce that the blue carbon project called the Coco Pamorja, the mangroves in Kwale County, was the first ever blue carbon project in the entire world. It was certified by Pan Vivo as still active. And so that's a landmark activity in terms of oceans for Kenya. Of course, mangroves are essential. They're sort of like the forests of the ocean. So they're critically important in terms of biodiversity, and also preventing some of these floods coming onto land that we see, managing some of the storm water coming in. So we thought it would be important for you to have a peek at how that blue carbon process works.
From an aerial viewpoint, the beauty of Kenya's south coast is eye-catching. This well-conserved forest gives the region a green and beautiful feature. However, before the government imposed a ban on logging in the year 2018, degradation of the forest along the coastline that stretches more than 500 kilometers was rampant. The mangrove forest, though is yet to be regenerated fully, currently boasts of a forest cover of 20%. But there's a ray of hope as communities living along the coastline in Kwale County have taken to planting and protecting the mangrove forest.
Hii mangrove ni maliasili yetu tangu enzi na enzi, lakini tulikuwa nazo tukitumia kama mambo ya nyumbani, kwa makuni, kwa kujengea.
We toured Gazi and Makongeni villages in Msambweni constituency, where locals have been planting and nurturing mangrove forest for the last 6 years and making economic gain from it.
Ndo walikuja na utafiti na wakagundua kuwa katika mikoko kuna ile hewa kaa nyingi sana.
The community formed a group known as Mikoko Pamoja through the support of Kenya Marine Fisheries and Research Institute KMFRI, World Wildlife Fund WWF, Kenya Forest Service, among other sponsors, where everybody in Gazi and Makongeni villages is a member. They make money from selling carbon credits, an activity not known to many. So we sought to find out what carbon credits are.
Hapa Kenya imeestimatiwa kwamba ukilinganisha na ule msitu ambao uko intact wa terrestrial wa Kenya, mikoko iko 10 times more efficient in terms of carbon capturing.
Payments for carbon credits are determined by the ability of a tree to absorb carbon from the atmosphere and reduce greenhouse emissions. The process of determining how much a tree can fetch starts by the collection of data from mangrove trees in a sample area by taking measurements of the tree trunk, the radius and the height. This is then multiplied by the number of acres covered by the mangrove tree and measured in tons of carbon dioxide.
Tunaipima diameter yake katika urefu wa kifua ama diameter at breast height, alafu kisha tunapima height yake. Hivi vipengele viwili, diameter na height, ndio vinatavita to guide ufanye calculation ujue huu mti una weight kiasi gani ambao utaiconvert into carbon benefits.
Mikoko Pamoja's carbon credits market is from international volunteers, air polluters through factories, travelers and research organizations. Locally, the group has no buyers. In simple terms, the group is paid for conserving the mangrove. In the case of Mikoko Pamoja, after they started the restoration exercise of planting over 2,000 seedlings, the group is paying 10% of the 3,000 tons of carbon. This encourages further restoration of degraded areas, increasing the forest cover. The group oversees a mangrove forest that covers 117 hectares and earns between 1.2 to 1.5 million Kenya shillings every year.
Tunapanda lakini survival rate yake iko chini, so hatumit ile target ambayo tuliwekea na lile soko la kimataifa ya kupata ile hewa kaa kutokana na upanzi.
The money earned is used for community development. This water project at Gazi village was rehabilitated by members of the group to address water shortage in the villages. The group has also funded other projects and donated books to Gazi Primary School, easing the burden for the pupils.
Wanafunzi wetu wanajua mkoko ni mti very important sana. Kwa hiyo carbon offset, mkoko unakunywa a lot of carbon, so ni muhimu kwa mazingira ya kesho, ambao mazingira ya kesho yako kwa maisha yao.
Earning from carbon credits is not only confined to areas along the coastline. People in the mainland too can reap the benefits of such projects. Starting a group requires developing a clear plan and guidelines of how the project will benefit the community. Next, it will be necessary to submit the plan to an international firm that deals with certification of carbon credit projects like Plan Vibo of Scotland. After the group is certified, it can be allowed to start trading in carbon credits. Residents of Vanga have also followed suit in planting and conserving mangrove forest in conjunction with Kenya Forest Service, Ministry of Environment and other stakeholders to increase forest cover in the area.
A total of about 62,000 hectares of what should have been mangrove forest. Out of that, 40%, 25,000 hectares have been degraded, destroyed completely.
If they don't conserve these ecosystems, the fisheries, which actually form about 80% of the economy of this area, will collapse. And therefore, we must appreciate and understand that they are conserving for themselves.
Apart from earning from carbon credits, mangroves are also known to offer breeding ground for the fish, absorption of carbon, beekeeping, construction, and act as a buffer for ocean waves, among other benefits. But what makes carbon credits important? According to environmental experts, they form a way to reduce greenhouse emissions by giving monetary value as an incentive to the owner.
Forest has 40% capacity towards a reduction of greenhouse emissions.
For the lifeline of the coast people actually is hedged on how well we conserve the mangroves. Now we have a strategic intervention to even channel our resources in a very specific and targeted approach to be able to change the story along the coastline.
Projects such as Mikoko Pamoja are some of the key interventions the world can embrace to mitigate effects of climate change. The success of Mikoko Pamoja project is a clear indication that environmental conservation is beneficial not only to the ecosystem but also to the people and communities involved. Dan Kaburu, K24, Gazibe in Kwale County.
So there you have it. If you want to have more fish in the ocean, we need more mangroves. There's 62,000 hectares that need to be rehabilitated or regrown. So for those saying, oh, it only happened in Gazi, in Kwale County, no, there's 62,000 hectares means there's a lot of opportunity for more people to do the same. The challenge that they're having is that those who seem to be aware or interested are mostly foreign in terms of purchasing. So instead of looking at expensive mechanisms like we hear a lot of direct air capture and how expensive it's going to be to meet this climate adaptation goals, and it's going to break businesses. Local businesses can invest in these nature-based solutions, very cost effective, helping things right here at home, helping, remember the Indian Ocean is shared, it doesn't belong only to Kenya, of course, also goes all the way to India. So if you want to do something small that can make a big impact, supporting mangrove restoration, purchasing blue carbon credits through the Mikoko Pamoja project. All those are affordable ways to really make a key impact in terms of how we're addressing and making things safer and reducing the emissions. And 40% carbon emissions sink is a pretty high sink. Wetlands and mangroves in terms of natural ecosystems. And of course, also forests are some of the largest carbon sinks in the world. And nature has all that machinery built in for us. So we don't have to buy new machinery, we just have to help nature with the machinery and systems that nature has already made for cleaning up gases and other issues in the environment, and other production happens in that natural machinery, such as an ability for fisheries to grow and protecting us from storm waters when there's rising sea levels. And with this, I'll also go to Zanzibar so that you can then see what's going on there in terms of how to make money from seaweed. And after seaweed, then we'll look at mariculture, which we saw on Tuesday. So I'm gonna cue those.
Kilimo cha mwani ni muhimu kwangu kwa sababu ndicho kinachonipatia maslahi.
Seaweed farming is a great source of income for most coastal communities around the world, especially for women, because culturally and because of norms and standards, they are not allowed to fish in deeper waters. Here in Zanzibar, TNC is collaborating with Cargill, Seaweed Corporation, and the government to train seaweed farmers on sustainable ways of farming seaweed, and so far it engages 3 villages. Seaweed farming can be environmentally sustainable as it requires no freshwater use for production or land and creates no carbon emission.
If the environment is poor, the seaweed will not grow because there is a very close relationship between environment and seaweed farming.
When farmed well, seaweed farming can be environmentally restorative by improving the water quality and providing additional habitats for the fish.
Cargill and Seaweed Corporation has been working together for a long period of time to buy red seaweed from the farmers that is used to extract carrageenan, an ingredient which is used in many applications from food to personal care.
We are excited to train farmers on seaweed best management practices that would help to protect the environment as well as increase their productivity. During trainings, we've taught farmers on better site selections for their farms, as well as introduced a farming technique that increases the production to 2 or 3 times more, and it's called the double muddy loop. It involves tying 2 seedlings on one spot. We've also identified and mentored champion farmers who would showcase these techniques to other farmers.
Sasa hivi nimefaidika na mafunzo tena kwa nguvu sana, sababu nimejifunza unyonyeshaji wa mwani, nimejifunza kwenye kufunga mwani na nimejifunza kwenye uanikaji wa mwani kuongezea kipato.
Basi tunasema kwamba zao la mwani ni sekta muhimu sana katika uchumi, lakini ni sekta ambayo inakwenda direct au moja kwa moja kwa jamii husika ya visiwa vya Unguja na Pemba. Nashukuru sana kama upande wa serikali kwa mashirikiano ambayo yameonyeshwa kati ya TNC, Seaweed na Kagera, ambao tunasema kwamba ni mashirikiano ambayo ni mazuri na yanahitaji kuendelezwa ili faida ya mafunzo haya yaweze kupatikana kwa vijiji vingine.
Through this project, we hope to improve management of over 100 hectares of coastal areas. At the end of this project, we are impacting the farmers by providing them a way that they can benefit by increasing their productivity. On the other hand, it helps the environment through sustainable seaweed farming practices.
So the importance of that video was twofold. Number one, regional cooperation. We are an East African community, as we heard in our anthem, East African anthem at the beginning. That's learning from our friends in Zanzibar about the ways in which to improve. And it's also a gender approach to, finding ways, what are things that women can do that are easy and help to contribute, finding ways for people to be inclusive. Would like to add that when it comes to the seaweed and the algae and a lot of these sort of what people think as marine weeds, it was mentioned briefly that they have a lot of important chemicals. And at the higher end of the scientific research and commercialization, those chemicals are highly valuable. And also when you're thinking about the waste, a lot of, if you separate out the different types of waste when you're processing fish, there can be ways to extract chemicals from what is normally thrown away, and that way you have less dumping of waste into the ocean, just because we think that wildlife and fish naturally decay in the ocean doesn't mean that any spot is ready for the amount of consumption of decayed waste that we do after we've finished our processing. So to the extent that we can look at chemical extraction from seaweed, algae, we have also mussels and clams and bivalves of all sorts that can be looked at. The shells sometimes get to be discarded as well. And one of the reason I'm mentioning all those is that the seaweed and algae, we know about coral reef being important in terms of sustaining life, but the seaweed also, where you have a lot of seaweed, you'll have a lot of aquatic life. And so you want to maintain that high balance of seaweed. I know when swimming, seaweed can be a nuisance. When you're out on a boat, seaweed getting into the rotors can be a nuisance. but seaweed is also very important to maintaining the marine life and the aquatic life within marine systems. And from there, let's look now at ways at the mariculture, which goes deeper into how to make money.
Fisheries, where we are this morning. Where we are now, we are in a marine aquarium, whereby it's just a model of sea. The model of sea, as you know, as our fishery is getting finished in the sea, so we have to make sure we show the community, all the people, the concern of the sea. As you can see inside, we have live corals. We advise people accordingly not to step on the corals and any future which is in the sea. As you can see, everything here is live. So it's a model of sea. As you can see, we have marine fish and all sea organisms like starfish, as you can see there. We have sea cucumbers inside, but they are hidden in the rocks. As you can see on the far end there, you can see a live coral, which is just mushrooming. In here, to make our seas well, we in the aquarium, we make sure we take parameters like pH, salinities, and DOH. So we must see if the pH is high or the salinity is high, the water needs to be changed, so to maintain the life inside. And also inside we have the wave makers, which are just making the water to the animals, that the fish to see that they are in life. And as we can go on, you can see more animals inside. So it's a model of a sea. When we preserve our seas like this, we make sure they are all will all for our fish, as we have so many kinds of fish.
My name is Peter Thuo, an attaché at KMFRI, and my supervisor is Gladys Moka. So we are in our air wet labs, and we are doing an experiment that has been running for the last 2.5 months. And in the experiment, we are trying to check on which feed does well in the tilapia. So we formulated several feeds. We have our blood meal, which we use the blood as the main protein content. Then we have the black soja meal, where we substituted the fish meal with the black soja fly larvae. We have the telablaria, where the telablaria was the main protein content, and we have the normal feed that is produced at KMFRI. So during that period, we have observed that the water clarity and the water parameters are based in the black soja fly larvae meal, but when it comes to the growth factor, the telablaria is the best, followed by the blood meal. So by the end of the experiment, we are supposed to write a report and recommend what should be done in the fish meal production, and produce a substitute for the fish meal, which has become problematic to the world.
My name is Maureen Mukami. I am a mariculture scientist at Kenya Marine and Fisheries Research Institute.
My main interest is on Artemia pond farming, and where we are right now is an Artemia lab, and this is where we are going to install the Artemia cyst processing equipment. But currently, we are running some experiments here in the lab on Artemia production. Basically, we are doing laviculture tests. That is trying to test Artemia using different species to see how the growth is, how the survival is, and also to see if our Artemia that are being produced here in KMFRI are of high value or can grow the larvae, because we know that the challenge in fish farming currently is on the growing of larvae. So this is Artemia that has hatched. Let me give you some little bits of Artemia biology. Artemia is produced in the ponds and in the salt ponds because it thrives so well in very high saline waters. And in Kenya, we produce it in the salt farms. You've heard of Ken Salt, you've heard of Crystalline, who are producing salt for consumption. That is where we produce the Artemia. We inoculate it or hatch and then put it in the salt ponds. And when Artemia becomes an adult on the 15th day, so it produces young ones. And Artemia can either produce young ones, like organisms that are moving, or cysts. And cysts means eggs. It's just the same word as eggs. It produces an egg with a very hard shell on the outer cover, because and this is they produce them during different environments. When the environment is very harsh for Artemia, it produces a cyst, because now it knows I'm about to die, and I might die without offsprings. So the best thing is I leave the offsprings in a cyst, in a shell form, and then when the conditions are good, the cyst will hatch and my generation will continue.
My name is Shaban Nzano, a research scientist and also a member of the Artemia lab. Now, apart from producing Artemia, we also do some pilot breeding experiments in the Artemia lab. At the moment, we are piloting the breeding of the freshwater shrimp, Macrobranchium rude. Now, Macrobranchium rude supports a dry fish fisheries in Kilifi County, but over years, the catch rates in the world have greatly reduced, probably as a result of overfishing and also the effect of climate change. So the idea behind the breeding program that we are undertaking is, one, to see if we can introduce Macrobranchium rude as among the species cultured in aquaculture. And then the other reason behind the breeding is to try and see if we can enrich the world stocks with larvae that are produced in hatcheries.
I'm David Midumbi, KMFRI intern. So this is our feeding room, feed production room, where we make feeds. So at KMFRI, we ensure that the feed that we are taking to farmers are within the accepted standard, that are within the market range. We compete with commercial feeders, those who make feeds like Fugo and different suppliers. So we have to ensure that we use our ingredients are in good condition, whereby we have high protein content, we have the wheat with high carbohydrate content. So we ensure that we mix them in ratios. We use the Pearson square method to ensure that our proteins are within the range, our carbohydrates are also good, and then the binders are also in good condition. So after obtaining feeds from the feed room, we ensure that we spread the feeds uniformly so that they do not disintegrate.
Mwaka. I'm a research scientist at the Kenya Marine and Fisheries Research Institute. This is a Dabaso area where we installed our cage. This kind of cage is called floating cage. We have different types of cage. This is floating cage. We have fixed cage, and also we have the submerged cage. We have the submersible cage, and this cage is 12 by 4 and by 1.5 meters. So right now what we are doing is harvesting so that we start the other experiment as soon as possible. So we are going to remove all these fish that are here in the other compartment and the third compartment as well, so that next week when we come, we start another experiment. Right now we've stocked rabbit fish, we've stocked tilapia marine, that is marine tilapia fish, and also we are coming to stock sea cucumbers. We do source fish from the wild, and we put them here for 6 months. Then after those 6 months, the fish are always have grown for consuming, and after that we normally give this fish to communities, because they already have a restaurant just here where they normally take them and sell them to the tourists. About feeding, we normally take feeds from KMFRI and give it to them. The ones that we formulate at the station is whatever they are consuming. This net is used to protect predators, especially birds that come along. So when birds come here, they'll not have space to predate our fish that are inside there. So that is the reason as to why we normally put this net. The project was last year's PC target, and it started in 2020, the year 2020. It has been here for a year now, and the reason as to why we started this is to utilize the blue economy potential in coast, because we have a lot of land and it has not been utilized, especially at the coast. Right now, we only have 2 cages at the coast, and this is the first one. The other one is at the north coast, and that's why we had to start this cage, so that we can utilize the potential of the blue economy sector.
Cages are enclosed facilities on the bottom and the sides of either wooden, mesh or net screens that are meant for rearing fish. They allow exchange of natural water through the sides and below the cage, that is in most cases. So a brief history of a cage. Cages were traditionally found in Japan at a place called Camp Chumea in 1851. At the Mekong River, that is where the cage fish birth was taken place. So it then went to Kampuchea, to Thailand in 1930s, and also in Indonesia in 1940s. And then according to FAO 2001, it came to Africa in 1988. And here in Kenya, cage was established first in 2005. And currently it is practiced in most of the African countries like Ghana, Uganda, Zambia, and Zimbabwe. So there are different types of cages, and the first one is the fixed cages. We have floating cages, we have submerged and submersible cages. The one that you're having here in Dabaso, this you could say is a floating cage. So coastal communities have vast opportunities for cage culture because of its huge untapped blue economy sector. And many types of water resources can be used, like the lakes, like the reservoirs, the strip pits, the streams and rivers, which could otherwise not be harvested. And also it allows the use of the pond for sport fishing or the culture of other species. It's easy to install fast, and the fish inspection is also easier. But since the cage is meshed, the fishes inside have less chances of being attacked by predators. Worldwide, cage fish farming is booming in Asian countries like the Chinese, the Indonesia, the Philippines, and here in Kenya, in Kenyan coast, a lot of potential is untapped. From Kilifi all the way to Tana River, offshore areas have shown to have a huge potential compared to the near shore places. And we've seen that Kilifi has been shown to have huge potential compared to the other coastal counties before. So let's utilize the blue economy potential. Thank you so much.
So there you saw two applications of what you can do with mariculture. One in terms of being able to test how to restore the natural ecosystems by setting up containers, tanks in which you can look at the interactions and see what it would take to regenerate that ecosystem from scratch. And then you can do those approaches when you're actually in the ocean itself. And the other is to keep the stock of the fish high. And that is in areas that have high tourism, high fishing, high consumption of fish. You can set up cage fish establishments, fish cage establishments in order to be able to replenish the stock of and you saw the birds are able to detect, so you have to cover the nets of the fish cages so that the birds don't eat what you're helping to grow. So that's the regenerative marine ocean farming and from that perspective. And there's definitely an opportunity for more, as you saw, in terms of the coastline and everything else that is available where more of these can happen. And for those of you who know Japanese culture, you'll know sushi, the consumption of raw fish is high there. And there's also now, I'm a sushi fan and you get good sushi in Kenya as well. And so these are the types of activities that are enable such commercial activities like eating sushi and others that require a lot of fish cash. Because sushi, since the fish is raw, you have to consume it the same day. You can't store it. So those are the types of activities that allow high consumption and without depleting the natural fish stock. The other thing that we had talked about was marine spatial planning. So I want to show you an IUC UNESCO video on nature-based solutions and urban planning, but looking at this from the perspective of oceans, because normally we think of, if we think of urban planning, we think of work on the ground. And this is to show you that it can happen with the oceans as well. And hold on while I keep.
Good afternoon, everybody. This is a short presentation on coastal nature-based solution and landscaping. This work has been started and accomplished by a strong collaboration between research institutions such as the University of Bologna and CMCC, the Euro-Mediterranean Center for Climate Change, and the Environmental Protection Agency that formed our basic stakeholder co-design partner. In this short talk, I will give you details on coastal ocean hazards, impacts, and the way that they can be solved with nature-based solutions. Then I will show you an approach, rather a new one in the past 20 years, where digital twin methods could be used to assess the effectiveness of nature-based solutions, and then conclude with some comments. The coastal zone is a highly populated area. Approximately 40% of the world ocean population lives within 100 kilometers of the coast. This population density is due to the numerous benefits that coast provides, such as access to fishing grounds, transportation, and recreational activities. But the coastal areas are threatened by many climate-related hazards, such as sea level rise, erosion, storm events, and flooding. Coastal nature-based solutions are solutions that are offered by an approach that is inspired and supported by nature, which are cost-effective, simultaneously provide environmental, social, and economic benefits, and help build resilience. So they are probably the optimal choice, but they are difficult to implement and to choose among the different options. It is crucial to implement sustainable coastal management practices to reach coastal resilience. Here we consider nature-based solutions that are defined, as we said, and in the picture you see some of the most commonly used nature-based solutions, such as mangroves, coral reefs, elevated coastlines, dunes. Today we have a new methodology to test the effectiveness of the coastal prediction nature-based solution that stems out of the operational availability of observations and validated models. So first of all, we ask ourselves, what is the solution to be tested? And in this case, I will show you results on local seagrass meadows and dunes, sand dunes. And we ask ourselves, are these natural environments which should be restored capable of reducing wave surge amplitude and inundation areas? So we have a digital twin framework that is composed of many models, partly coupled. One is a wind wave model, a circulation model, a morphodynamic model, and then we have a practice in calibration and validation with local observations, maybe collected for the digital twin. And we have this background information coming out of operational models that give the background flow field. And we ask what if scenarios, such as what is the reduction in the wave amplitude due to seagrass types and landscaping, and what is the impact of dunes and seagrass on the coastal inundation area. These are two papers that illustrate the results of our work in the past 3-4 years, and these examples are referred to the Emilia-Romagna coast. The investigated nature-based solution for the Emilia-Romagna coast are seagrass meadows, in particular Zostera marina or Cimodocea nodosa, and artificial dunes done, however, completely with natural materials. But what happens when seagrass is present? Seagrass offer a roughness that makes it possible to dissipate energy in the ocean. And here is a schematic of the reduced wave height that the presence of seagrass can allow, extracting energy through turbulence and drag from the waves. Our digital twin for nature-based solutions try to answer the question, are seagrass meadows capable to protect the coast? And here you see the different type of seagrass that is available in the Mediterranean Sea, different kinds of Zostera, Posidonia, and Cimodocea. But more important for this talk is that we try different landscaping of the seagrass. See, here you see 4 different realizations with continuous strips of seagrass put into the model to simulate the presence everywhere of Zostera or Cimodocea. Then a second landscaping where we had more irregular areas, bunches of seagrass, as outlined by the orange triangles. And here we have an alternation between a continuous strip and clusters. And the last one, clusters with broken lines, which most adequately simulate the natural behavior of seagrass meadows. So our results here are outlined for two kinds of landscaping of the seagrass. The first is the continuous strips with clusters, and the third is completely irregular strips and clusters. And you see the colors when they are from yellow, green to blue, they indicate reduction of amplitude in the waves. And the isolines, the black lines here, indicate depth of the water. So for our coastline, the 5-meter depth is very close to the coast, as well as the 10-meter. And this is facilitating the possible restoration of seagrass meadows in this area. Now you see that the yellow and green colors are more abundant in the case of the broken strips. And some also along the coast you see very much extended blue areas where the reduction amounts to 70%. So this landscaping of seagrass offers the possibility of having a major reduction in specific areas as needed, depending on the incidence of storm surges. How about inundation? So here we see the effect of dunes and seagrass. The normal conditions due to a large storm are outlined on the left, and you see a large area inundated with quite a large amount of water. Amount of water is shown by the blue color. The intermediate result here is where vegetation of the kind that we have shown is implemented in the open area, and the vegetation is capable of reducing not only the area but the amount also of water that enters the land. The major effect is due to the long red strip of dune that drastically reduces. So maximum inundation reduction is obtained by the dune, but the combination of the two is actually optimal. In conclusion, coastal hazards and climate impacts require ecosystem-based solutions. Nature-based solutions' effectiveness against storm surge can be numerically simulated with a digital twin modeling framework. Seagrass meadows are powerful protections for the coastlines, and the positive impact depends on the landscaping of the restored seagrass. Combined dune and seagrass offer an effective solution along the Emilia-Romagna coastal strip to defend the coast from storm surges and inundation. Thank you very much.
Hope that was something exciting. In spatial planning on land, you have all these tools like building information modeling and how to geospatial mapping. What we were hearing is a lot of people were wondering, how do you use those same tools in spatial planning? And it's basically the same. So instead of maybe planning for how to put in houses, what you're doing is how to put in systems such as dunes. On land, we have sand dams. On the coast, we'll have dunes, sand dunes. And all of this is expensive. So what a digital twin is you either have a two-dimensional, which is the when you use cadastral mapping, GIS mapping, geographic information system. If you add digital models like physical construction models, then you get the third dimension. And you can do infrastructure planning, not only to figure out the cost, but also the optimal use with that seagrass. That was a really good experiment to see how should we put the seagrass and where should we place it in order to get the maximum effects that we want in terms of reducing flooding. We have increasing tsunamis. So far, they haven't hit Kenya, but they've hit other parts, especially the southern coast of Africa. So these are, for those of you with technical skills, with analytical skills, who are wondering if you feel that there are not enough planning and infrastructure development jobs on land-based type activities. There's always the ability to expand in coastal and ocean marine planning activities. We're increasing the number of ports along with those ports, because those ports become disruptive when the marine vessels come in and out. A lot of places around the world are building estuaries, and to have estuaries and arcs along the coastline near the port, so that then you sort of restore or reverse or mitigate the disruption that is caused by gaining the port. And we'll have on these technology side, one last video in terms of how to use smart systems to be able to scale up these marine planning and marine conservation efforts. And then we'll close the session for today and for World Oceans Day. Although if you Google UN World Oceans Day, there will be plenty of online material and events from all over the world, including the UN, that you can look at. So hold on, one last video. So on Tuesday, you heard from Jerry Matukwa from the Nature Conservancy, and he was demonstrating aspects of what the planning activities and high-level coordination that the Nature Conservancy is working on. And there was a number of questions about how to get that high-level activity down to the ground. And there was some confusion as to why the plans were being set up in the way they were. We hope that between this and this seaweed video, you get a better understanding of the type of activities on the ground, and also the why all that high level structure of development is being put in place. It's a small number to set aside 30% of coastal area. Kenya has coast, so especially if we expand that definition of coast, not just into the basic, but also to adjacent islands, and think about how we can do all that. And I know this is the Oceans Decade, but think about also the interconnectedness between the inland oceans, as we call them, the lakes, the large lakes, Lake Victoria being a large lake. We have Lake Turkana, Lake Nakuru. All of these have river flows and feed patterns. So when we're thinking about oceans, let's look about and integrated. Today we focused on the coastal line, but we also need to think about how the integration of these aquatic systems, starting from the mountaintops and the trees and the water towers and the catchment areas flowing into lakes and rivers, into different tributaries that then lead into the ocean. We want all that to be clean. We want it to be free of chemical pollutants. And I mentioned that not just because of chemicals, but our specialty at the Center for Science and Technology Innovation in terms of the scientific focus that we have. We come at everything from the chemical perspective. So when people are saying greenhouse gases, we think chemicals. When people are thinking about ocean systems, we think about the acids and the pH. And we also support all the organizations that you've heard from and more in terms of assisting when needed and connecting the dots. Our role is to outreach to the community, make things more accessible, help people understand the applications of science in that realm. And with that, I don't know, Eva Komba, do you want to say anything before we close? Okay, what we'll do is we'll also share the recording of this and it's been streaming live on YouTube, so you should be able to catch it on our YouTube channel. Remember, you can also Google UN World Oceans Day 2023 to find content and additional events from all over the world, including the United Nations itself, UNESCO, and you can look at past also Oceans Day. If you just Google UN World Oceans Day, you'll see past events and collaborative activities online, and that will help create better awareness of what's going on and how you can participate. So, Asante Misana, Guru, thank you so much. Deep gratitude for having spent time with us. We know your schedules are busy, and we appreciate your commitment to making sustainability in our oceans and our aquatic systems, including inland water systems, in addition to land-based systems. Thank you so much. Have a good day. Tides are changing. Let's make them change for the better. Thank you.